nurse at Middlesex Health from the hospice and palliative teams. And we're doing a series, actually, of presentations for you in the coming weeks. So oops, I'm sorry.
You keep talking.
There are some slides that I'm going to kind of skip over pretty quickly, or because we may be going into more depth with one of the other programs. But I recognize that you might not all be able to attend all of the programs that we're doing. So we will have questions and answers at the end, if you like, so that I can answer any questions that may not have been answered in the rest of the presentation. Okay. So I'm going to try putting this on my file here. Can you still hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So now, Alex, if I just give you the sign, you'll advance the slide. Is that how it works? Okay, this is very professional. So, Ben Franklin said that there are only two certainties in life. What are they?
Does anybody know? Death and taxes, that's right. I don't know if you know, he said this in a letter to a friend, and he went on to say, "My health continues much as it has been for some time, except I grow thinner and weaker, so that I cannot expect to hold out much longer." And I really like that. That was the next line there, because it shows that in those days people were a little bit more frank and willing to talk about the end of life. And that's what we're here to talk about too. But in our society, people are really hesitant to talk about death a lot. And what we really want to focus on our hospice team especially, and also in palliative care, is that life is something that we shouldn't take for granted, and we want everybody's life to be a celebration at the end of their life, if possible. And so in order to do that, sometimes any celebration, you have to plan ahead. So this is what our presentation is going to be about today. My boss always says that, when somebody's expecting a baby, we have all kinds of hoopla around it. We have the baby showers, and now they have gender reveals and the birth announcements, and then all the rites of passage, the baptisms, and birth announcements and things after the baby's born. But when somebody is dying, a lot of times we don't even acknowledge that it's happening. And what is the cost of that? A lot of times the cost of that is regret. Regret for people not being able to say the things that they really want to say to someone at the end of life. The regret for not passing on important information or stories, things like that. And regret for leaving a mess because you just haven't been prepared. So today we're going to talk about, trying to avoid some of that regret, because no matter how we all know death is coming. We all know that none of us are going to escape it, but we never know when it's going to be. We don't know the time or the day. And so because of that, this is something that we're going to give you some ideas of things that you can do for yourself so that you know that you're ready when the time does come for you. Okay? Can we go to the next one, Alex? I just want to say that you'll see some cartoons and videos in this presentation. They're offered in the spirit of education, so we believe that constitutes fair use according to U.S. copyright law. All right. You know what? I don't know if you can. I'll try to read the captions for you if I can remember them, if they're hard to read, okay? So our objectives today are to develop a plan for getting your affairs in order, to discuss what's important to you in terms of leaving a legacy, and then to think about what living well means to you, because that's really the first step in making sure that you're celebrating a life well lived, is to think about what living well is and do whatever you can to try to get toward that end. Okay, we can go to the next. I'm going to be using a couple of terms here, so I just want to talk about them up front in case you hear anything. Goals of care is a term that we use all the time in palliative care. It just means knowing what the goal of your treatment is. I want to say that regardless of where you are in your health situation, even if you're perfectly healthy, if you're going to a doctor, if a doctor is prescribing a treatment for you, you should always know what the goal of that treatment is. And a lot of times the doctors just kind of take it for granted that you do understand, or don't feel that it's something that you're interested in. When I'm talking about what the purpose of the treatment is, I'm talking about Are you getting a cure? Is it like you're taking an antibiotic because you're expected for this infection that you have to be cured? Is it that you're hoping for a restored level of health or a restored level of function or rehabilitation? Or are you looking for treatment, is this treatment going to extend your life without necessarily curing what you have? Or is the goal of the treatment simply to control symptoms and allow the disease to take its natural course? And surprisingly, I talk to people every day about their illnesses, their serious illnesses that many people have been having, experiencing over weeks or months or years. And many times they do not realize that the treatment that they're getting is really not intended to extend their life or is not intended to cure what they've got. And so that's why it's always important, and you have a right to know when you're getting treatment what the goal of your treatment is. So that's goals of care. The other two terms that I had up there, one was palliative care. And palliative care is it's a specialty in medicine. It's a fairly recent specialty. It really just means extra support to a patient and their family. The patient and the family are considered the patient in palliative care. It's distinguished from hospice care, which is support for a patient and family at the end of life, in the last 6 months of life when somebody's got a terminal illness, in that you can have palliative care at any age, any stage of your illness. As long as you have a serious illness that's impacting your quality of life, then palliative care is something that might be beneficial to you. And your goal of care could be anything from cure to hospice care. Hospice does fall under the palliative umbrella, but it's just one type of palliative care. You could really be treating very aggressively for something and still get palliative care if your illness is affecting your quality of life. Thank you, Alex. So this is, if you haven't figured it out, this has been designed for a Zoom presentation. So normally we would be polling people here and letting people vote. But just thought about, just a question for everybody to think about. You don't have to raise your hand if you don't want. But I'm wondering if any of you have given any thought to how you would like to be remembered when you're gone. Is that something that anybody's thought about? Maybe in your head, some half hands. Okay, thank you, Alex. So getting your affairs in order, and if you can't read the caption, the gentleman behind the desk is saying to the Grim Reaper, "Thank goodness you're here. I can't accomplish anything without a deadline." So this is a little joke for those of you who are procrastinators, because the first step in really getting your affairs in order, you know that old saying, like when people, "Come on in, hi, how are you?" Plan your grand finale?
No, there's a lady outside who was supposed to be at a meeting, the end of life meeting.
Oh, yeah, she's at the right place. Yeah. Okay, all right. We're only getting started, so yeah, thanks. We must look very vital. That's good news. Okay. So, like when you see those old movies where the doctor says, "I think it's time for you to get your affairs in order," I always wondered what that meant. Like, what does it mean to get your affairs in order? It's just a very general term, and doctors still use that term sometimes. So we're going to talk today about what it means to kind of get our affairs in order and how we can do it. Like I said, death sneaks up on us all, even though we know it's coming at some point or another. So today, what we're talking about is how you can, first of all, live life. If you want to be able to live your life with intention all the way up to the end of your life, there's some planning that needs to go into that. We're going to give you some resources, and actually at the end of this program, we are going to hand out some evaluations so that if you would like us to get in touch with you to talk more on a more personal basis about any of this that we're talking about today, you can leave us your contact information on that. And we will also, if you give us an email, we can email you a link to our resources, okay? Not sure if she's coming in. So let me just be clear about what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, hi there, welcome. When I'm talking about getting your affairs in order, what are we talking about? We're talking about getting our financial affairs in order, our emotional affairs in order. We're talking about resolving unresolved social issues possibly, or business issues. And information so that for the people whose life is going to go on, that things are going to go as smoothly as possible for them. Getting your affairs in order might also mean taking care of your bucket list. Is everybody familiar with that term, bucket list? It's from a movie probably about 10 or 12 years ago now, where Morgan Freeman had a bucket list, I guess, of the things that he really wanted to do before he kicked the bucket. And so what does that mean for you? Think about it now. Does that mean, are there people who live far away who you would want to see again? Are there trips that you've always said you're going to do one day, or things that you always want to do one day? Now's the time to start thinking about that while you're able to do those things. Getting your affairs in order might also mean, again, leaving a legacy, thinking about how you want people to remember you when you're gone, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then it also means, thinking about how you want communication to go out when you do go, and how to let everybody know who you would want to know about these things. And finally, it means thinking about your final disposition, whether you wanted to be buried or cremated or entombed. Those are the three major ways, and what kind of services do you want and things like that. Okay, you can go on to the next one. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, because next week, is that the 23rd next week? Next week, we're going to do a presentation on completely on the advanced directives, but no discussion like this would be complete if we didn't say that one of the first things that a lot of people do when you're talking about getting your affairs in order is developing an advanced directive. And what we mean by that is figuring out who's going to speak for you. If you're not able to speak for yourself, that would be appointment of a healthcare representative. They go by a couple of different names: power of attorney for healthcare, a healthcare proxy, a healthcare agent. Thinking about who that person would be, because if you don't choose someone, the person is going to be your next of kin, and you might not want your next of kin to be have to struggle with those difficult decisions and things like that, or they might not know your wishes as well as someone else who you might have had these conversations with. Living will is another aspect of advanced directives, are a living will or healthcare instructions, and that would be deciding how aggressive you want treatment at the end of life. And again, we'll talk about that more next week. You may want to document leaving an anatomical gift. Do you want to donate your organs after you're gone if you're a good candidate for it? Would you want to donate your body to science? I should tell you that a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to donate my body to science because that's the least expensive way to take care of this. There's no guarantee that the people who, that science is going to accept your body. So you should have a plan B if that is your plan. It's hard to get into Yale even after you're gone. So, and then finally, you might want to think about designating a conservative person. That's especially if you're anticipating that you're not going to be able to make decisions in the future. You might want to say, when I'm no longer able to make decisions for yourself, when a doctor decides that I'm going to appoint this person to make decisions for me. So those two links there that we would have clicked on if it was a Zoom, we're going to send you, if you give us your email address on the evaluation, we'll send you links to those, because it is the Your Right to Make Healthcare Decisions that the state of Connecticut puts out in conjunction with the Department of Social Services and the Department of Health. They have like a standardized living will that you can print out tonight if you want and start filling it out. You could have it notarized, but even if you don't get it notarized, if the person who the people in your life who would be there in the emergency room, if you ever went to the emergency room, know where that is, you should bring it with you. A lot of times people fill out their living will with their attorney and they don't realize that doesn't follow you everywhere. So have a copy, have people know where that is. All right, let's go to the next slide, Alex. So the next thing that you might want to do when you're thinking about getting your affairs in order is leaving a letter of last instruction. Again, there's a lot of terrific worksheets that you can just download from the internet that are free. The one that we really like is the University of Idaho Letter of Last Instruction. You can Google it yourself if you want to get started tonight, or we're going to send you the link. There's this terrific book from somebody who's actually a Connecticut resident. or she was, I don't know if she still is. It's called In the Checklist of Life. And it's a workbook that you can purchase. I think it's about $15 on Amazon, and fill out all the things that are in a letter of last instruction. This lady, Lynn McPhillemy, is that how you say it? She's a riot. If you ever get a chance to go to a presentation that she's giving, she gives, she takes a heavy subject matter and really lightens it up. And I remember when she did a presentation for our Hospice and Palliative Summit, she led off by saying, what would happen if you ceased to exist? What would happen to you? Would your family know where the septic tank is? And I don't think my family would know where my septic tank is. So some of you are probably on city water and don't get the joke, but that's an important thing for people to know. So the letter of last instruction really goes page by page talking about all of the things that somebody who has to kind of wrap up your affairs would need to know to be able to wrap up your affairs, okay? It tells about the location of your personal papers and your personal property, the disposition of your most valuable, the things that you like the most. I know we all think about the reading of the will being, like a list of things like I'm giving this to this nephew and I'm giving this to this child or whatever, but most wills are not really written that way. And so this is your chance to write your intention for where everything's going to go. You want to be able to pass on your, they say never write down your password or usernames, but I have to tell you, as a hospice nurse, one of the greatest aggravations that people have when when their loved one dies or their loved one is no longer able to speak for themselves is that they can't get into their bank account, their online, banking, or they can't close down their cable account, so they keep getting charged month after month for their cable and their utilities and things like that. So the letter of last instruction, if you seal it up, that's a good place to keep your passwords and things if it's in a safe place. Your insurance policies, if you're a veteran, if you have your what is it, the DD-214? Is that your DD-214 papers, those are really going to be critical if you're going to have any veterans benefits to take advantage of at the end of life, if you're going to be in the veteran cemetery or something like that. I'm going to talk a little bit about a to-do list for the immediate postpartum period. And then it's also, the letter of last instruction is also an opportunity to send messages to people if you haven't had the opportunity to speak with them that you really want to pass on. Okay, you can go to the next slide, Alex. So I said that I was going to talk about a to-do list for your loved ones. So I want everybody to take a moment to think about where you hope to spend your last hours of life or your last days of life, and who you hope will be there with you, okay? You don't have to say it out or anything like that, but just have that idea in your head. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to preside over someone's death, and I really do consider it to be like a presiding over somebody's death when you have the fortune to be with somebody at the end of life. It's also highly emotional, as you can imagine, if this is somebody who you're close to, and it's very difficult a lot of times in that period of time for people to think straight. They've got a lot on their mind other than the business of taking care of what needs to happen next. And so you can do them the kindness of thinking those things through for them. So the first thing you might want to do, and this can be part of your letter of last instruction, I think it is included in the University of Idaho one and in this one as well. But you can set up a phone tree or, identify people from all the bubbles of your life. And I love it that, because of COVID, everybody knows what a bubble is now. But if you think about all the bubbles that you have in your life, you have your church friends and you have your work friends if you're working, and you have your book group or your other, the people that you go fishing with. You have your maternal relatives, you have your paternal relatives, you have your in-laws, and those people may not talk to each other, or might not even know who everybody else is in those circles. So what you want to do is think about who should be your contact person in each of those places, and leave for your loved ones the name of that person and their contact information Make sure that you update this frequently because people's addresses and phone numbers and things like that change quite, often. Not as much anymore now that people have cell phones. A lot of times the cell phones will follow you wherever you go, but you want to make sure that those are all up to date. So a good time to do it, honestly, is like around your birthday, or it's some milestone for you every year. You want them to know how to notify your employer if you're working. People probably know where you work, but they might not know what department you work in. They might not know who your direct supervisor is, and to be on a phone tree and calling around to a big corporation or something like that at a time when you're grieving is going to be difficult. So make it as easy as possible. If you have made arrangements at a funeral home, be sure that people know what funeral home it is. As a hospice nurse, I can't tell you how many times I'll get to that portion of our conversation and say, and do you know, if she's made any arrangements at a funeral? Oh yeah, it's all paid up. We've got a prepaid funeral plan and everything. I'll say, great, where is it? And they don't know, and nobody knows. And they're calling around and saying, what do you, and sometimes they have to end up calling the funeral homes themselves and saying, do you know who my mother is? And so you want to make sure that you pass that information on. You probably want to get 6 to 10 copies of the death certificate at least. You might want to let your loved one know how many, estimate how many copies you're going to need. So you will need a death certificate to close down utilities and things like that, to notify the bank to stop charging, the estate for the mortgage and that sort of thing. Again, with the veterans, you will probably need a copy of the death certificate along with the DD-214. And you'll need a death certificate for every one of your life insurance policies if you've got more than one. So it adds up. So, give them some idea of how many they should ask for, because there's nothing more annoying than having to keep going back to vital statistics and getting another copy. And then be sure that they have your letter of last instruction if you've put it together. That letter of last instruction, you can make copies of it. You can give it to all the kids. Keep a copy in a special place. I just want to give you a little tip. If you have information that really needs to follow you to the emergency room, or that needs to be found in a hurry at the end of life or something like that, keep it on your refrigerator. That is the place where all the ambulance drivers will look for your medication list. You should have a copy of your current medications on your refrigerator. Sometimes there are special envelopes or little vials that say vial of life on it that you can just get, in the pharmacy. And the EMTs know to pick that up, so that helps your records follow you. Okay, next slide there. How are we doing on time, Diane?
We are at about 7 of 7.
Great, okay. So when thinking about end-of-life planning, think about for a moment what you think is most important to you. Is it making sure that your legal affairs are in order? Is it saying certain things to your loved ones? Do you want to encourage conversations with loved ones about your final wishes while you're still in good health? We'll talk a little bit about that in more detail in some of our other presentations if anybody's planning on coming. Checking off items on your bucket list. Now's the time. While you're healthy, while you're vital, take care of the things that you've always said you want to do. And then not planning and letting your loved ones have to figure it all out. In other words, not leaving a mess. Is that really what you want to do? What do you think? What is most important to you? Maybe you do want to leave your loved ones a mess. I'm not sure. All right, or it might be something else. All right, Alex, we can go on to the next one. So another thing that can be very helpful for you when you have a serious illness, if you know that there's going to come a time when you're going to be able to do less and less, you're having a functional decline. When somebody is sick, a lot of times people will come to you or come to your loved ones and say, oh, I'm so sorry, is there anything I can do? I don't know if you've ever been in that position when somebody said, is there anything I can do? But in the moment, it's so hard to think of something. So another thing that you might want to do is make a can-do list. And so that when people come to you and say, is there anything I can do? You can say, you know what? We have a list. Do you want to sign up for something? and, put all different kinds of tasks on. Some will be big tasks, some will be very small tasks in case they're not really sincere about it. They can pick something small. But, think about things that you might not be able to do, like walking the dog, or, people are going to have a funeral to go to soon, so maybe you want to have somebody polish everybody's shoes, or do a run to the dry cleaner, things like that. You're doing two things when you do this. First of all, people want to help, and if they, there's a lot of times people go to the house of the person who is dying to try to help, and they're just in the way. And so this gives the people who are closest to you something to get them out of the house and feel like they're doing something and feel good about what they're doing. But the other thing it does is it helps free up the people who you really want to be at your bedside to be there. Because I always say to people, when you're dying, your world starts to get very small. You really start to think, do I want to spend an afternoon with this guy who's always kind of gotten on my nerves, or do I want to spend it with my children? Those kind of things. When you're dying, you have a right to do that, because time is your most precious commodity and you don't want to be wasting it. Okay, so these are some of the ideas that, of things that you can do. All right, Alex, we can go on to the next. The next thing you want to decide is who's going to be in charge of things when you have to start handing over direction and things like that. So who's the best person basically to act on your letter of last instruction? It'll start probably right before you're gone and then continue after you're gone. It's not always the most obvious person. The person who's closest to you is also going to be grieving. And so if you know that that person is going to be really struggling with this information, or struggling with what's just happened, sometimes the last thing that they're going to be able to do is read a checklist and think about what it takes to accomplish the things on the checklist. So no matter how easy you make it, it still might be an overwhelming task. On the other hand, there are some people who deal with their grief by doing things. That person might that might help them with their grief to have a list of things to do. So think about that a little bit, and then make sure that you have somebody who's got some diplomacy skills, because tensions do run high when there's an illness like this. Know when to go pro. Sometimes people hire from the outside to have somebody that there's a growing industry of death doulas or end-of-life doulas. And it's like a birth doula, but it's somebody who really would help the family figure all these things out and kind of think about it in an objective way when emotion is getting in the way. And then do make sure that if you're thinking of somebody who you're going to assign the task of being the person in charge, have that conversation and be gracious if the answer is no. Have a plan B. Not everybody, people might surprise you. They might not feel like they're up to that task, and they might say, I'll do anything, but I won't do that. I just don't want to. You don't really know what their relationship is like with your other family members or things like that. And, you wouldn't want this time to be associated with, them getting into a dispute with people or anything like that. So I would be gracious if they said no, or if they seemed uneasy about it. Say, just think about it, and, give them the out so that they can get out of it. And think about who your plan B would be, or think about, hiring somebody or getting a volunteer. If you're associated with a hospice program, we actually have doulas who are volunteers who can, help with these activities too. So, and make sure that everybody knows, so that they don't think that, this person who you've assigned is taking over. Sometimes we see a lot of tension around that, where the children are like, well, I should be doing this. And, so before it ever gets to that, you can say to your kids, you know what, I just want you to be there for me and to enjoy our last time together. And so we're going to let Aunt Frances do all of the planning, or, something like that. Okay, Alex, we can go on to the next one. So this is me. I just need to get all my affairs in chaotic neglect before I die. I'm doing a good job on that. You probably, I hope that when the question and answer time comes, you're not going to ask me how much of this I've done for myself already, but I have made some progress on it. Alex, if you want to skip to the next one. So let's think about what you would want your personal legacy to be. And I don't know if you can read that, but it says, someday this all will be yours, and it's a dumpster fire. Kind of appropriate for this time in our lives, right? How would you want to be remembered? We've all seen really great obituaries and obituaries that kind of fell flat or were more like a resume. Like a resume or a curriculum vitae or something. And we've all heard eulogies that were really powerful and emotional and really captured the essence of the person being eulogized. And then we've heard, I think sometimes you can tell when, the person who's giving the eulogy didn't really know the person. So if those things are very important to you, you can plan ahead on that too. And that is something that a lot of people are like, well, that's not my job. That's for somebody else to do. But again, the people who would do the best job at that are going to be grieving. And so, it's okay to talk about this ahead of time. It's not morbid. It's a gift. I can tell you that you may need to ask and may need to ask and may need to ask. Let them know that you really are serious, that when you say, I want you to help me write my obituary, they'll say, oh, Mom, you've got a long time ahead of you or whatever. But we don't know, and we're doing this now so you don't have to do it later. Unfortunately, I lost my brother this past year, and he asked us 3 or 4 times before I was like, oh, I think he really wants us to do this, but we thought he was kidding at first, and then he asked again, and it was wonderful. My boys and my mom and I all sat down around his bed. He was in a hospital bed at the time. He was on hospice, and we had the best time that night. I had a easel, and I was taking notes on it and everything. We didn't use there was a lot of bawdy stuff on there that we couldn't use in an obituary. But we had the best time, and my brother really had the confidence that we were going to do a good job on his obituary. We can go to the next one. So there's a bunch of different ways. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit behind. And so we can skip to the next one. I just want to tell a little story about this picture here. Another of the people in our group who's not here tonight, Sherry Russenberger, this is her bapchi, her grandmother. And she told us this story, and I said, I need to have that picture. Her bapchi died maybe 10 or 12 years ago, she said, and it was always bapchi's job to make the gravy, and nobody made gravy like bapchi did. And so on the first year after she was gone, this is Thanksgiving, Sherry said, it was my job to make the gravy, and I was so worried about it, about how it was going to go, that it wasn't going to be like bapchi's. But she had a picture of bapchi there on the counter while she made her gravy, and she said it came out just like hers, and it's come out perfect every time since. And every year she puts that picture there while she makes the gravy so that bapchi made the gravy for, so I think that that's a really lovely story, and it's a really lovely way to be memorialized. And it's not something that people would necessarily think of, but if there's something that's really important to you, I have a date with my mother to watch her make pie, because nobody makes pie like my mother does. And that's going to be something that I'm going to be able to pass on to her grandchildren, to my brother, my remaining brother, so that we have that forever. So again, if we don't think about that all of this is going to come to an end, we're not going to be able to save some of this. And this is really what we're trying to accomplish. An ethical will or a spiritual will is very similar to the letter of last instructions. Again, we'll give you a worksheet, but it's more about collecting the remembrances, maybe the knowledge of past generations and things like that that you would want to make sure live on after you're gone. You can tell stories in it, you can acknowledge important people or events in your life, pass on your family history, little anecdotes, or more formal family tree or whatever, and leaving a record of what was really important to you, your values, things like that. If you had a heart-to-heart talk with your children or other family members about what your philosophy of life was and what you were really proud of, that could go in your ethical will. Okay, Alex, next. The obituary, we talked about it a little bit already, but you want to make sure that if there's going to be a photo on your obituary, it's a photo that you like. So there's no reason why you can't go out and get a headshot done, but if there's a photo, I don't know if you noticed obituaries, but nowadays, if somebody took a candid photo of you that is really nice, as long as they don't have to zoom in too tightly so that it kind of gets pixelated, a lot of times they can crop out your head and do that. So, think about what headshot you want. And do you want it to be something of you current? Do you want it to be, your high school picture? Some people put pictures of themselves from all different eras of their life in their obituary. Think about making sure that your children have all the information that they need to have about you. You don't want to leave one of your kids out of the obituary because they forgot, because he's on the West Coast or something like that. Military service and the things that are significant to you, but again, it doesn't have to be a very dry list of everything that's gone on in your life. But the things that really did matter to you, it could be a work experience. You were really proud. I had one of my patients was part of the program, the guys who thought up the frequent flyer program, and what a legacy that is. You never know, you don't know who really starts, ideas like that, but he started at American Airlines and then it went to other airlines. So things like that, or including your passions, your hobbies, things, whatever you really want to appear in your obituary, it's okay to tell your family that you want it to be there. And I don't know if you've ever read a really amusing obituary. Sometimes I think people want to put things in an obituary and they're like, well, is this disrespectful? Would she like it? If there's something about you that's, like that you like to go to flea markets or anything like that, but if people would recognize you in that, go ahead and put that in too. Whatever is, going to kind of encapsulate who you were as a person, that's what should go in there. All right, Alex. And then the eulogy. Okay, the eulogy can be very tricky. This lady's saying, but I'm not just here to plug my podcast. So you want to make sure that the person who's saying your eulogy understands what a eulogy is. Have you ever been to a service where the person who was doing the eulogy was talking just about themselves? And it's awkward for everybody, including the person who's up there. So they don't know it, but it is. So, think about who you would want to give it, what to put in and what to leave out of the eulogy. It's okay to leave notes for that person. When you're talking about who's going to give the eulogy, I gave a eulogy once for my grandmother, and it was a bad choice because I just was sobbing through the whole thing. So if it's somebody who's a little too close to you, that might not be the person to give the eulogy, if they're going to get broken up about it. Also, remember that if you pick somebody to do your eulogy, they might not have knowledge of your entire life. So again, with my brother, he grew up here on the East Coast, but then spent most of his adult life on the West Coast. And so we had two people eulogizing him, one from his work life who turned out to be his best friend, became his best friend, and one from when he was a young guy, his next door neighbor who he was best friends with and remained friends with throughout his life, but at a distance because the local fella didn't know what his life was like, day life. So you've got two people who can kind of put together the picture of a life, capturing the essence. Again, it doesn't have to be a biography. It could just be, what are the things that were important to him, really spoke to him, really showed his essence. Okay, next slide. And then funeral services, memorials, and disposition of remains. A lot of people have very definite ideas about this. But again, a lot of people don't tell their loved ones what their definite ideas are. And I, again, have been in many rooms where, somebody's going forward with the burial arrangements and everything, and then, the kid from the West Coast flies in and says, oh, Mom said she wanted to be cremated. And, now all of a sudden, you've got to mediate a dispute because people can't agree on what Mom or Dad really wanted. So The three main ways of disposal of remains are burial, cremation, and entombment. I'm not an expert on green burials or things like that. I have a friend who's a doula who might be able to answer any questions that you might have about any of that, but those are basically the three main ways. If you're going for cremation, you don't necessarily have to engage a funeral home to do that. If you want to do this the least expensive way, you can do a direct cremation directly with the crematorium, and then they give you the ashes, and you can determine what you're going to do with the ashes, and all that should be specified as well. If you don't want a burial at sea because you were always afraid of sharks, then let your kids know that you don't want a burial at sea because you were always afraid of sharks. And we're going to have another link for you if you give us your email address. Can you tell I want your email? We're not going to put you on a mailing list, though. It's just going to be, to send this out, and if you want us to contact you further, we'll be glad to do that. So hopefully, if you don't need our services right away, if you know somebody who does, feel free to reach out to us or let us know on your evaluation that you want us to reach out to you. Okay, Alex. And the goldfish said I've already made arrangements to flush myself down the toilet. That's not legal in the state of Connecticut, so just so you know. So just to kind of wrap this up, because again, we're not, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the next couple of slides because we're going to do them again. We're actually, can you believe what a difference a week makes? Last week we were having snow and sleet and everything, and today it felt like it was like 70 degrees. I don't know how warm it was, but so we are hoping to record our presentation that we were supposed to do last week and make that available to you as well. We're not as good as Alex, so it might take us a little time to do that. But so living well and ending well. Alex, if you want to go to the next slide. This is kind of the commercial part of our program, because I do work for hospice, but I will tell you that people always think that their doctors are going to let them know when it's time to think about hospice. And in general, doctors do not let you know when it's time to think about hospice. Sometimes I call up the doctors and say, this person is begging for hospice. The hospice medical director looked at the record and feels that they're appropriate for it. And the doctor will say, oh, they're not ready for that yet. Because in the doctor's mind, being ready for hospice is being ready to die any day now. But hospice is a 6-month at least program, and many people stay on a year. Sometimes we've had 2 years or longer. As long as 2 doctors agree that if in the next 6 months it's quite possible that if your disease is allowed to run its natural course, you will die, then you're appropriate for hospice services. And hospice really does support the patient and the family a lot of times to stay home. Most people say that they would like to die at home if possible. A couple of different surveys that I usually talk about, which I won't talk about today, but the general number is around 80% of people say that they would prefer to die at home. Only 20% of people die at home. So it's flipped. But the disease trajectory that you might see if you're seriously ill, and again, I hope that this is in the distant future for you, would be if you have cancer, a lot of times you're doing pretty well until the treatments stop working. If you're going from, second-line treatment, third-line treatment, at that point, you might want to tell the doctor, you know what, I do want to know when it's appropriate for me to switch over to hospice. Is it all right with you if I talk to the hospice team and see what they have to do? And the doctor will say, oh, I don't think you're ready for that yet. But I feel better planning ahead. Just be prepared for that response. Because when things do start to change, they tend to change very fast if you've got a typical course of cancer. The blue line represents people who have end-stage organ disease, so that would be heart disease, lung disease, kidney disease, liver disease. What we see a lot of times with those folks is that you do okay, and then you have a little dip in, you might go to the hospital, you might go to rehab, then you come back up, maybe not to your baseline of function though, the y-axis is function, and kind of go downhill that way. And again, that's really hard for everybody, the doctor, you, even the hospice team, to predict how much time you really have. We don't have a crystal ball, but we do have things that we look for. We'll ask you questions, and we can tell you, well, you know what, if you did want to stop going to the hospital, you could go on hospice. Those are the big draws about hospice, is not having to go back and forth to the hospital, not having to go back and forth to rehab, just trying to stay as healthy as you can in place. If we identify you for hospice early enough, a lot of times you've got a longer lifetime, because we're not giving you a lot of treatments that are undermining your health in other ways. And so that's why, we're trying to reach out to folks like you to let you know that if you want to talk to us about when you're ready to start thinking about hospice, we'll reach out to the doctor for you if you'd like to do that. And then that lower line is people with dementia. And if you have a loved one in your life who has dementia, you will know that a lot of times they enter the last year of life, if this is a year's time, already a lot of times very functionally impaired. And that hospice is really helpful for those people. A lot of people don't even realize that you can have hospice if you have dementia. But hospice is very helpful to those folks who are caring for the person who has dementia, because their world has gotten very small and they get more isolated because they can't go out with people and things like that. So again, give us a call. It's never too soon. We might say, you know what, it seems like things are going okay. Why don't I check in with you in another 3 months or something like that? But it's never too soon to start thinking about these things. Okay, I spent more time than I really meant to on that. We can go to the next one. Because the cost of not talking about death is that we don't do all the really important things at the end of life. And as a hospice nurse, that's probably one of my sadder moments is, everybody that I care for as a hospice nurse are dying. But it's sad when people say, oh, I thought I had more time. I had so much I wanted to do. Why didn't my doctor tell me? First of all, doctors get yelled at a lot, so I'm not being negative with the doctors. A lot of times they get a lot of flashback from people when they start to try to talk about hospice. So we want to take that burden away from them if possible. And if you're on board with us taking that burden away, a lot of doctors will say, oh, that's, that sounds like a good plan, let's do that. But the 5 things that people really want to be able to say at the end of life, you want to make sure that you're leaving time to say this to the people who are important in life. To say thank you to the people that you have something to thank them about. To say I love you. There are some families where they really have trouble with those words, I love you. But it comes much easier at the end of life, and it can be very touching. A lot of times you might want to say you're sorry. The people who have the most complicated grief, I think, are people who never got to resolve issues with somebody, or their loved one died while they were in a dispute with them or something like that. So you want to give them the opportunity to not grieve you that way. To say I forgive you if they need forgiveness, the flip side of that. And then, of course, to say goodbye. One of the stories I always tell, Diane's probably tired of hearing this, but I used to be the nurse manager up on the Comfort Care unit on South 7. And I had a conversation with a gentleman who decided to go on to the hospice program. He was going to start the hospice program there in the hospital, and we were going to get him home once his symptoms got under control. But the minute that he signed the paperwork to go on to hospice, he called up all his children. He had 11. And he said, I went to see him like a couple of days later, and they had all flown in from all parts of the United States. And so this is like in maybe 2016 or 2017 when this happened. He said to me, these are all my kids, and the room was packed with people. He said, these are all my kids. He said, I haven't had all my kids in the same room since 1979, because they were like a generation apart from the oldest to the youngest. And you can understand how that can happen. But what a gift that he was able to get them all together again, and he felt so good about that, to just see all his children together at one time. So I think we can go on to questions. What do we have? About 10 minutes, okay. We do have, what happened? Oh, there they are. We have some mics. If should I bring them to you, or would that work? Does anybody have any questions?
You can use one of them if you bring it up.
Okay. Anybody have any questions that you want to ask out loud? What's that?
We're saying, I'm teasing them because they're saying they're loud, and I'm telling them I heard you.
No questions?
Is there a charge for your services?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So for the palliative consultation, and remember that palliative care you can have at any age, any stage of disease process, regardless of what your goals of care are. We're not just trying to steer you onto the hospice program. There's many people that we get on palliative care who wind up, getting off of palliative care and we never see again, which is wonderful, and they can continue to thrive. If you wanted to talk to somebody about palliative care, you can call us up. We have our number on the website, and it'll be on our resource sheet, I think, right? Mm-hmm. And it's in the palliative information line. Usually the person you get is me. So, and I have a questionnaire, a standard questionnaire that I go through that I ask you. We'll get into a conversation and talk about the things that are really on your mind if you're asking for a palliative consultation. And if you are looking for hospice, that will come up as well. The things I ask you, just so you know, is I ask you your physical symptoms, your emotional symptoms like sadness or nervousness or anything like that. Then I ask you about how you're getting along, that your functional status, like are you able to do everything independently, including, getting dressed and going to the bathroom yourself and that kind of thing. And then I ask you a question, and I always preface this question by saying, I'm going to ask you a question. You might have an answer right away. You might need to think about it. That's okay. If your doctor had to make a decision about your care right now, would you rather that he do everything he can, even if it might mean more pain or discomfort, or would you want to have him just focus on your symptoms, even if you might not live as long? And a lot of people have an answer right off the bat. They know exactly what they want. It's probably something that a lot of people who are actually calling me or wanting this information have been thinking about already. Other people say, oh, that's a tough one. Sometimes we kind of get into a philosophical debate. I had a really lovely guy who was my own age who has been sick for a very long time, and he said, he told me, gee, that's a really good question because, I'm kind of surprised that I'm still here at all. And he goes, every day I give thanks for being alive. He said, but if I can, I'd like to keep going. And I said, that's a good answer. Now I have a much better idea of what you're looking for. But it's the most gratifying job I've ever had because you get to talk to people in a very real way about things that people aren't really able to talk about a lot of times. And
Getting this, and that's free of charge.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. The question was, that's free of charge. And then most of our services, we will evaluate whether or not you qualify for services under your insurance, or usually people have Medicare. Usually the people we have Medicare. Commercial insurance gets a little more tricky. We have to go and talk to somebody else in the billing department because if you aren't familiar with commercial insurance, no matter who you have, it's whoever's negotiating the contract is what's in your policy. So like if you work for Google, they might not even have a hospice benefit because they figure, their population aren't going to be needing it that much. So, but we would figure out, what going forward, what it would, cost you if anything.
Do you go into nursing homes?
Not for palliative care because Medicare considers that double dipping. For hospice care, absolutely, because for a lot of people in nursing homes, hospice, the nursing home is their home. So if somebody's there as a resident, if they're going there to live, not just for a short-term rehab and the plan is to get them out again, then yes, we would go in and give hospice in the nursing home. You can't be on rehab and be on hospice at the same time because those are contrary goals of care. So the Medicare wouldn't pay for that. But if you were living in the nursing home, yes, we could do that. I have to tell you, this is one of the hard parts of my conversations that I have with people, that when you're going to a nursing home to live, the expenses are out of pocket. Medicare will not pay for your room and board if you're going there as a resident to a nursing home. Only if you're going there for short-term rehab, and once you meet your rehab goals, you have to get out, or else you have to start paying out of pocket for room and board. That comes as a surprise to a lot of people. But it's important to, kind of think about that ahead for some people as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, can I call you in the middle of the night when they all come in?
She's a wonderful information.
Yes. When the questions come in, can she call me in the middle of the night? You know what? Yeah, leave your questions on my answering machine. Again, and maybe some of you don't have an email address, and if you want me to give you a call, leave your phone number on the evaluation.
Just pass this
I'm
out.
just wondering, did I actually put pens and pencils in here?
This is 4 weeks long, right?
Yes.
Yes, so I'm just saying a lot of the questions will be
They'll
generated.
come, okay, I'll have to make each one shorter so that we can fit more time into the questions. Does anybody need a pen and pencil? I don't know if I can promise you one.
I think probably the bottom of my purse I have.
Leave it
As
to
I'm
them.
listening to this, I just have to share that,
If you use the mic, okay, just so we can pick it up.
I just want to say, as I listen to all of this, I'm very grateful to my own mother, who has planned everything. Everything is done, her obituary's done, and as her daughter and the executive of her estate, I couldn't be more pleased. And she and I actually did her obituary together, probably about 3 or 4 years ago. Because I said, Mom, you have a lot of these accomplishments, I don't know exactly what you want in there. So, she helped me do it, now it's done. So it isn't morbid to do with your kids, I guess I'm saying, as someone who's been through it.
Does everybody know that it costs money to have an obituary?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it can run to be a pretty big expense too. So what I've seen some people do is, check the current rates in whatever papers they want to be in. You can't be in every paper you can't be in the New York Times unless they decide that you're a person of record. That's an editorial decision that the Times makes. But if, in your local papers or whatever, it doesn't hurt to call them up, check the rates, and write a check for, ahead of time. They might have to make up the difference if the rates change, so that's again why you want to look every year and update everything that you've got in your letter of last instruction, things like that.
We bring this back next time.
Sure, that's fine. Yep.
And don't,
I'm not very good under pressure.
That's
don't
okay.
have